Hello and welcome to Aspirants Study Circle. Today, the discussion would be about the Indian economy being the fifth largest economy in terms of nominal GDP, overtaking the GDP of the UK. Now, what is the implication of such a news? And we need to discuss if it is really a cause of celebration. What are the other sides of the story? That is something that we need to explore on. And before that, we need to know the differences between what nominal GDP is and what real GDP is. So nominal GDP takes into consideration inflation. So that is something that you have to keep in mind. And the value in terms of dollars is around $850 billion. So now what are the advantages of a high economic growth? So before we talk about the aspects that we are not satisfied, we are not today satisfied where we are supposed to be. But of course, we are on a growth trajectory. But before that, we need to discuss what are the advantages. So a high economic growth would suggest, or it would invariably translate into higher incomes, obviously. Now, higher incomes would mean that there is a large amount of people that will be eligible to pay taxes. So the tax base would increase, and hence there would be an increase in tax buoyancy. Now, when I say tax buoyancy, that would mean that the change in tax revenue, which is linked to change in the growth, GDP growth rate. So when you have a higher tax buoyancy, that would lead to higher investment. Now, higher investment would be in terms of social infrastructure, which would be health, education, sanitation, etc. And it would also mean physical infrastructure, which would mean laying of roads, connectivity, electricity, so which would ensure last mile connectivity. So when such things happen, one needs to remember that this is a positive cycle of growth. And when there is a positive cycle of growth, the revenue that the government gets would be sustainable. And when the revenue that the government gets would be sustainable, that would indicate that there are strong macroeconomic factors like the physical deficit would be low because the current account deficit would be low. That is because the borrowing dependency of the government would be low because of high economic growth, because of higher incomes, there would be tax buoyancy. Now, this would lead to better public services. Now, the public services, like, for example, today, we have immense difficulty in traveling from one place to another because the public transport system is not so effective. It is not so seamless. So we, as a common man, I as a common man face a lot of problem traveling on roads, especially in public transport. So when the public delivery of goods can be improved by this way, having good metros, having good buses, and so that the traffic too is streamlined. So all of these services would enable a better quality of life for a common man. So these things need to be taken into consideration. And also at the same time, we will have much more income, much more money to invest in better technologies with respect to protection of environment, sustainable development. Such higher goals can be also achieved. So this would in turn lead to lower unemployment. The overall standard of living would improve, and hence it would lead to decrease in poverty. So these are the multitude of advantages that one can observe when a country is on the rise. So at the same time, we also need to discuss what happens when we are not able to actually be where we want to be. Now, if we compare the the UK and India, we need to compare in terms of the size of the population. Now, when it comes to the size of the population of India is around 1.4 billion, whereas the population of UK is around 65 to 75 million, So our population is 20 times more than the population of UK. So even though our GDPs are equal, that doesn't mean that the GDP per capita is the same. So there is a stark difference because of our population size. Now, the GDP per capita of United Kingdom is around about $40,000 per capita, whereas for India, it hovers around ten to $15,000. In Indian rupee, it is around 90,000, 90 to 95,000 rupees based on the exchange rate. So the difference is enormous. So the question arises whether can we actually compare. And at the same time, when we talk about the poverty levels, back in 19th century, in the beginning of 19th century, the absolute poverty levels of the UK were much higher than that of India. But as of now, of course, there have been multiple government schemes of various governments from 2005. And at the same time, we've been able to lift around 200 to 250 million people out of poverty. Yes, we have done extraordinarily well. But at the same time, the comparison of poverty levels of UK and India is something that we have to remind ourselves that we are not doing that well, right? So another indicator would be the Human Development Index. Now, Human Development Index would mean a composite index of health, education, standard of living. Now these indicators mean that an individual is able to live qualitatively a very good life, because education, health, and standard of living enrich the person's capability to live better. So when we talk about this index, the United Kingdom ranks about 0.8 to 0.85 out of 0 to, on a scale of 0 to 1. It has a score about 0.85, whereas India, we have a score about 0.6. So there's so much difference. And at the same time, when we talk about universal health coverage, now universal health coverage, it's an index. If you have to rate it from 0 to 100, so the United Kingdom would be about 85 and India would be around 60. Now, what are the parameters under universal health coverage? That would be essential hospital services like reproductive health, maternal health, newborn baby health, child health, nutrition, the extent of non-communicable diseases. So such things we still lag behind the United Kingdom. So there could be a question that despite the high economic growth rate, what are the major deficits, or what are the lacuna that India still faces? So this would be a generalist answer. So you can mention these points, and at the same time, from preliminary point of view, you need to understand that the value of this GDP is calculated on terms of nominal GDP. So you need to know the difference between real GDP and nominal GDP. And at the same time, you can go and look up what is the difference between purchasing power parity, because in terms of purchasing power parity, India is third. But in terms of nominal GDP, India is fifth. So please do look in more for conceptual clarity. I hope this session was helpful. Thank you.